Hello, it's me, Christine. Welcome to my little cat corner. My cats are everything. I'm confident that if anything were to happen to me, they would handle my affairs. They are so perfect and intuitive and polite. 10/10 would recommend to friends and family. You may be thinking I'm just using this as an excuse to introduce my perfect little angels, but we have a very interesting case today, and it's the first time that I'm aware of that a cat has had a direct part in the conclusion of a case. We have a lot to cover, so let's get started. On October 7th, 1994, a woman in Prince County, a rural area on Prince Edward Island, called police to report a suspicious car on the edge of her property, facing the direction of the neighboring field. It had been there for a few days and appeared to be abandoned, and she didn't get super close to the car, but she could see from a reasonable distance that the car didn't have a license plate. Police arrived soon after getting the call, and upon inspection of the vehicle, they knew immediately that something was wrong. The inside showed evidence of what one can only assume was a brutal attack. There was blood spatter on the ceiling, windshield, seats, and dashboard. In addition to no one being found inside the vehicle, this would have been inconsistent with a car accident, and the blood was found in specks and like a spattering spray pattern, as opposed to a large collection of blood pooling in an isolated area. There was also no damage to the outside of the car to indicate any type of crash or accident. Although dried, the blood was still relatively fresh, and police knew that this crime would have had to have happened semi-recently. When exactly, they weren't sure, but this was definitely a crime scene. There was a small pillow found near the car that had a large blood spot on it. It had appeared in an effort to slow down investigators and to cover up the scene. The license plates had been purposely removed. However, after running the car's VIN, police were easily able to find the owner, a woman named Shirley Duguay. Shirley was a local 33-year-old mother of 5 who lived in nearby Richmond. Shirley had been missing for 4 days, and during that time, her father had been watching her children. Shirley had not been initially reported missing, since in the past, she had left for days at a time and hadn't told anybody. After a while, she would return, and business would resume as usual. Police and Shirley's family were obviously very concerned about the state that her car was found in, and were fearing the worst. Based on the blood that was found at the scene, they knew that time was of the essence. If the blood found in her car did belong to Shirley, she had certainly lost a lot of it and would be in dire need of medical attention. Shirley was very petite. She was only 4'9", and it is possible that she was overpowered and might have been unable to fight back. It was later determined that the blood-soaked pillow that was found near her car was what she was known to have sat on while driving. Several samples of blood found at the scene were collected and ended up being tested and compared to Shirley's dad, Melvin. It was then confirmed what everyone had suspected. This was Shirley's blood. Aside from the blood spatter found on the windshield and the seat, there were a few areas on the passenger side door and door frame area that were tested and came up as not belonging to Shirley. At the time, police feared that there might have been another victim. However, the amount was significantly smaller than what was confirmed as having come from Shirley. It was suspected that this could have been the killer's blood and might have come from Shirley fighting back. Extensive testing was conducted in order to establish and distinguish the profiles. Because Prince Edward Island was considered to be very safe, being that it was so small and home to such a tight-knit community. A crime such as this was exceptionally uncharacteristic for this area, and because of this, this prompted the largest search that the province had ever seen. Every available resource was called upon, including helicopters, aqua searches, and hundreds of police and volunteers searching the area on foot. Police even used some more unconventional methods, such as calling upon a psychic in order to get a lead. They were desperate and willing to try anything at this point. Believe it or not, some of the psychics had revelations that Shirley was buried in a shallow grave near a body of water, which is specific and not so specific at the same time. As you know, the island would have been surrounded by water, and shallow is shallow, depending on who is doing the measuring. But this was certainly worth looking into further and devoting resources to this theory. Back at the scene of Shirley's car, not more than 300 yards away, police discovered a large shovel and, upon inspection, found that there were 2 strands of black hair stuck between the wood and the metal part. Investigators carefully removed the hairs from the shovel, bagged them up, and brought them to the lab at the police station. While there, technicians were able to compare the hair to a sample taken previously from Shirley's hairbrush, and they were found to be microscopically similar. It is clearly troubling to find something like hair intertwined with the handle of a shovel. It is clear that violence had taken place here. Days and weeks passed, and there was still no sign of Shirley. As winter was soon approaching, investigators and volunteers ramped up their efforts and suddenly got a break. A little more than 15 miles away from where Shirley's car was found, investigators found a plastic bag containing a pair of size 9 tennis shoes and a brown leather jacket with several blood spots on it. When tested, scientists found that the blood on the jacket was a match for Shirley. But was this even her jacket? It was unlikely due to how big it was, especially considering that she was very petite. The cut of the jacket also indicated that it was a men's cut and most likely belonged to someone else. But how did Shirley's blood end up all over it? Could she have been wearing it at one point? As police talked to people around town, Shirley's father was asked if he had any idea of anyone who would want to harm his daughter. Without a second thought, he said that if anyone wanted to hurt his daughter, it would have been her estranged husband, a man named Doug Beamish. Doug worked as a construction worker, doing demolition and construction cleanup. Shirley's father, Melvin, had said that Shirley and Doug had been separated for the last 18 months and had a long history of being on and off during their 15-year relationship. Although they were not officially married, they were common law. When speaking to police, Doug did not appear surprised in any way, and he was almost indifferent to the fact that Shirley was missing. He gave the impression that she just up and abandoned her children. But Shirley's family knew this could never be the case. She absolutely loved her children, and she was a very devoted mother. When police looked more into Doug, they had uncovered evidence that Doug was physically abusive to Shirley on many occasions. They too were convinced that if anyone were to bring harm to Shirley, it likely would have been her abusive husband. Police paid Doug a visit at his home to further question him about Shirley's disappearance. Surprise, surprise, Doug denied any involvement, and he was adamant that he had absolutely no idea where she could be. He was sticking with his story that she had just run off and abandoned her children. His alleged lack of involvement did not convince police. Thinking back to the blood-stained jacket and tennis shoes found in the plastic bag in the woods near the vicinity of Shirley's car, they asked Doug what his shoe size was. Without hesitation, he answered, "Size 9. What a coincidence. The same size as those found. But hold your horses. This is obviously not an uncommon men's shoe size. It's arguably one of the most common. So, in an effort to put Doug in the shoes, investigators brought in a forensic podiatrist to examine the shoes and obtained a warrant to make a cast of Doug's feet to compare. The podiatrist made plaster casts of Doug's foot impressions and compared them to the impressions found inside the shoes. The wear patterns in the shoes were determined to be a match for Doug's feet, and the podiatrist was confident that the shoes had been worn solely by Doug. But Doug was adamant that he had not worn these shoes, and these shoes were not even his. Doug also denied owning the brown leather jacket that was found in the bag with the shoes. After examining the inside of the jacket, investigators pulled 20 very thin, brittle white fibers out of the jacket's lining. The fibers were thought to be hairs, although they were very fine and did not appear to be human hair, at least not Doug's, since he was a brunette. When examined under a microscope, the hairs were determined to be some type of animal hair, as the molecular structure instantly ruled out them having come from a human. Upon hearing this, the officer that had interviewed Doug was instantly reminded of something he saw in his home. He didn't pay too much attention to it at the time and kind of ignored it in passing. He remembered that Doug had a white cat. I don't know about you, but as soon as I enter a location and there's an animal there, that's immediately where my attention goes. Now, I'm not the police, and I'm not interviewing a suspect, but if I saw a cat, the officer recalled how Doug's cat, named Snowball, had walked up to him and circled him, rubbing up against his legs as he was leaving. Sure enough, when Snowball did this, he left behind several small white hairs, the same as those found on the inside lining of the jacket. Now, cat hairs are not the same as human hairs in that the microscopic similarities can't be compared the same way that human hair can. None of the hairs had any root attached, and even if they did, testing wouldn't necessarily determine who it came from. Now, cat hair can be compared, although this type of testing is nowhere near as sophisticated as testing is for human DNA, meaning that the specific cat wouldn't be able to be identified since the genetic makeup would be very similar from cat to cat. Depending on how many cats were running around in the area and not fixed, this search could have led to hundreds, if not thousands, of potential kitty suspects. Investigators were convinced that whoever had worn this blood-stained jacket had done something to Shirley. Determining the owner was the key to this case. Police felt that if they could prove where the cat hairs came from, they could pinpoint their suspect. This concept was a lot easier said than done, and at this point was nearly wishful thinking. Investigators discovered that this type of cat DNA testing had not yet been done anywhere in the world, which posed many more challenges. The cat hair was one of the few pieces of physical evidence that they had, and without making a conclusive match, they were nowhere closer to finding Shirley or finding out what had happened to her. Canadian police were able to get in contact with a geneticist from the United States named Dr. O'Brien, who happened to be the premier researcher in hereditary illnesses in cats. They believed that he was their best chance at using this information to get anywhere further with the cat hair lead. When on the phone with Dr. O'Brien, police reiterated that they were looking for an expert in cat DNA technology that would be able to tell them, if it were at all possible, to compare samples of cat DNA to find a conclusive match. They needed to tell whether or not the hairs found on the jacket lining had come from Doug's cat Snowball. Dr. O'Brien then requested that the police obtain a blood sample from Snowball in order to conduct this testing. Police then went back to Doug's house to get a sample from Snowball, but Snowball was being very difficult and not allowing the technician to draw a sample. The technician chased Snowball all over the house for more than half an hour until eventually police said they would have to take Snowball into custody. The RCMP then transported Snowball to a local vet's office where he was sequestered in a small examination room, and a vet was able to quickly draw a blood sample. A hair sample from Snowball was also collected. With 2 officers standing by as witnesses, the sample was drawn and then immediately taken to the lab at the police station. The officers then delivered Snowball's DNA samples to Dr. O'Brien and his team in person, so as to not affect the chain of evidence. Once received, Dr. O'Brien got to work. As he was looking at the hair sample, he found one of the hairs had contained a root. He then cut it into pieces and put it in a solution that dissolved everything except the DNA. This made it possible to amplify the sample in order to produce enough DNA for the several tests they would need to conduct. When the sample was compared to the hairs found on the jacket, as well as Snowball's blood sample, it was genetically a match. It was concluded that all of these hairs had come from the same cat. That cat was Snowball. To be absolutely certain that Snowball did not share any DNA with any other cat on Prince Edward Island, more DNA tests had to be conducted. It's possible that many cats share DNA due to the island being as isolated as it was, with the amount of house cats as well as stray cats that had not been spayed or neutered. Investigators collected blood samples from 20 cats on Prince Edward Island and sent them to Dr. O'Brien. Upon testing, he confirmed that each of these cats had a unique genetic profile, and no 2 were similar in that regard. He concluded that the chances of the cat hair found on the jacket belonging to any cat other than Snowball was 1 in 70 million. This was enough for the RCMP to confirm their suspicions. The jacket, which was stained with Shirley's blood, also held DNA from Snowball, and Snowball was an inside cat, thus confirming that the jacket had ultimately come from Doug's house. Soon after the results of the testing, and 7 months after Shirley was reported missing, a fisherman discovered a pile of brush on the riverbank that he felt didn't belong. At first glance, something didn't sit right with him. Upon a closer look, he discovered a shallow grave with what appeared to be human remains. Police were called, and when they inspected the remains, they discovered they were very small. Knowing that Shirley was under 5 feet tall, they strongly felt that this was her. The day the remains were discovered, there had been a snowstorm, and just as the snow began to fall, an officer took off his jacket and covered the remains. The skeletal remains were determined to be that of a young woman, and, as she was found, her hands had been tied behind her back, and there was evidence of strangulation. During the autopsy, this woman was confirmed as being Shirley Duguay, and the medical examiner had determined that her cause of death was due to blunt force trauma. He found that she had several facial fractures and injuries, including a broken nose, and her jaw was broken in several places. She was struck so hard that one of her teeth was found embedded in her lung. Just absolutely terrible. With Snowball's confirmed DNA being found on the jacket, Doug Beamish was then arrested and charged with Shirley Dugay's murder. During the trial, scientists revealed that inside Shirley's car, they had found traces of Doug's blood mixed with Shirley's. The prosecution had described how Doug had written Shirley an extremely threatening letter, in it saying he would kill her before allowing her to get custody of their children. Of Shirley's 5 children, Doug had fathered 3 of them. I have found information indicating the letter was possibly partially written in blood, or at the very least signed in blood. Just very disturbing. It's unclear why Doug ditched the bag with the shoes and jacket in the woods, especially so close to Shirley's car. Like, why didn't he think this wouldn't connect him with the crime? On July 19th, 1996, Doug Beamish was convicted of second-degree murder and sentenced to 18 years to life in prison. He filed a motion to appeal his conviction in 1998 and 1999, with both requests being denied. On July 26, 2013, he had formally requested parole. Doug was being held in a prison in Ontario and would have been 56 at the time. The board was considering whether he should be released on full or day parole. The parole board said that because of Doug's lack of understanding as to why he acts violently, brings into question his ability to not repeat this behavior in the future. Doug lost this appeal, with the board reporting that he continued to deny his guilt. They found that Doug had a medium level of motivation and a law integration potential. Although the board said that his conduct in prison appeared to be satisfactory, but noted that he was described as being demanding and confrontational, with a negative view towards the justice system. It was factored that although he didn't have a history of institutional violence, the board noted that he had numerous charges for disobeying the rules and had 17 disciplinary convictions, 10 of which included the refusals to give urine or DNA samples. Doug had 2 suspensions for the Prison Education Center and was also cited for making inappropriate comments to a female corrections officer. During this time, he had also requested to be moved to a minimum security prison, and this request was denied. Because of his psychiatric risk assessment from September 2012, the board suggested that he represented a low to moderate risk for violence towards the general public, but was an elevated risk to other inmates. According to the board's report, Doug's behavior could be described as having a very negative attitude. When repeatedly asked to attend an interview, Doug had refused to attend. The board said that Doug was not cooperating with his case management team while incarcerated, which led the board to believe that he wouldn't be able to work with anyone, attempting to monitor his reintegration into the community. The board ultimately denied his requests for day and full parole. In 2012, Doug once again went before the parole board, and this time he was granted a 12-hour escorted absence from prison. Doug told the parole board that he was not ready for full parole. Shirley's sister, Marie Arsenault, spoke at the hearing and said, "So many people have suffered and are still suffering all these years later. The heart-wrenching domino effect of loss and pain will never go away." Marie described how Shirley's murder had triggered a series of family tragedies, including the death of their other sister, who had an exceedingly difficult time after losing Shirley, that she turned to drugs and alcohol as a way to deal with the pain, as well as from the suicide of that sister's husband, and their father Melvin, suffering 13 heart attacks. Marie said to the parole board, "I am asking if the offender is to be released, he not be allowed to live in the Prince County area of Prince Edward Island." Something unexpected during this hearing was that Doug actually took responsibility for Shirley's murder, which is something he had never done before. He addressed the board saying, "I don't even know where to begin to calculate the harm I've done. I've done more harm to Shirley's family, all of her extended family, all over Prince Edward Island. There's no gauge what impact this has had." He also talked of the investigation in 1994, saying, "It went on and only compounded their grief and suffering." You think? As the parole board deliberated, they discussed believing that Doug had a very high risk of recommitting criminal acts of family violence, and that his behavior and understanding of his actions still require more improvement before full parole can even be considered. This to me just screams that he should not be released on parole. If there is even an ounce of thought that he might be violent again, just not a chance. When asked by a member of the parole board as to why it took him so long to admit to Shirley's murder, he said, "It was easier to blame everyone else. I didn't want to look at what I had done or the damage that I caused." As you recall, he had previously denied murdering Shirley at every given opportunity. Again, after being pressed as to why now, Doug said that he had had 3 heart attacks and was suffering from kidney failure. He said, "When you get to that stage, you realize that you need to clean up your past, and that's what I'm doing. I'm cleaning up my past." Just no. After reading all these records, there's absolutely no remorse there. Even if there was, it doesn't bring Shirley back. It does not bring Shirley's children their mother back. It does not bring Marie her sister back. It does not bring Melvin his daughter back. Feeling sorry for yourself during your health scare wake-up call does not change what you did and only makes you look more selfish and self-serving than everybody already thought. After serving time at various facilities in Ontario and British Columbia, Doug was then transferred to the minimum security Dorchester Penitentiary. While at a parole hearing there, the board noted several concerning incidents that had occurred recently that raised red flags. One of them being Doug throwing a butcher's knife while preparing food in the kitchen of the facility where he was being held in 2019. In 2020, he staged a hunger strike to complain about the food that he was getting in prison. Despite all of this, the parole board had approved a 12-hour escorted temporary absence for Doug at an, at the time, undetermined date. Doug said that he had planned to use the 12-hour pass to visit a halfway house in the Montcalm area, since he plans to work towards a possible full parole at a later date. He claimed he had no interest in returning to Prince Edward Island. The parole board offered Doug to be escorted by a corrections officer and a parole officer during his 12-hour absence from prison. In addition, he was ordered to have no contact with Shirley's family. The Correctional Service of Canada had previously granted escorted temporary absences for Doug for medical and compassionate reasons. In early October of 2024, Doug was granted unescorted temporary passes from custody after a Parole Board of Canada hearing, which lasted a little over an hour. This was especially upsetting for Shirley's family, with her sister stating that, "I think a life sentence should be a life sentence." The parole board said to Doug, "We look at your current offense, and your offense is a very, very serious one. You took the life of another individual in a very violent and callous manner, and the board does not lose sight of the very harmful effects that your crime has had upon the victim herself and upon the victim's family members." But this same parole board member also said that Doug had made progress while in custody. The board said, "The next logical step in your slow and gradual reintegration into the community is, of course, the unescorted temporary absences. The board sees the plan for those as being viable." Doug was given 2 72-hour unescorted temporary absences from custody in the Moncton area. That was then followed by a 60-day unescorted pass to a halfway house, which was also in the Moncton area. The conditions of Doug's release include not consuming drugs or alcohol, reporting any and all relationships to his parole officer, and having absolutely no contact with Shirley's family. The Moncton police indicated that they were cautiously supportive of this plan. Although it had been pretty well established that Doug would not be able to return to Prince Edward Island, he also felt that it would be in his best interests to not return either. It was during this latest hearing that he had told the court that the murder was not planned or deliberate. He said that for many years, he was in denial about what he had done. He admitted that the confrontation in 1994 had been related to the custody of their children. He said, "I lost control. I didn't think about what the consequences of my actions were going to be." Although he was ordered to have no contact with his children, he did reveal that he has had contact with one son. He said of his other children, "I understand exactly why they don't want to have any contact with me." After being granted the escorted temporary releases to attend AA meetings and to complete community service, he was granted work releases for 2 workplaces in Moncton. After the latest hearing, Shirley's sister Marie said that there isn't a day that goes by that she doesn't think about her big sister. She said, "Since my sister Shirley was murdered, it's been a constant struggle." She had to point out to the court that for more than 20 years, Doug took no responsibility for the murder and had shown no remorse and had exhibited little to no change in his ability to control his temper. I'm very interested in hearing your thoughts on this case. I don't believe that justice was served to its full extent. What I find the most intriguing about this case was that it was the first time that animal hair was used by the prosecution as evidence in a murder case to secure a conviction. Because of the blood evidence, Snowball's hair only strengthened their case. I'm thankful that this technology exists and was able to be used to help put Shirley's killer behind bars. And that is all I have for you today. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you learned something, and I will see you in the next one. Bye. But hold your horses. You want to go? What? Thank you. There she goes. You want to go with Stella? Go see Stella?